Today, we're going to be recapping the Minnesota Vikings preseason week one performance against the Denver Broncos, where they fell 33-6 last Saturday. No touchdowns, no turnovers, no sacks, 8 penalties, and 79 passing yards for the Minnesota Vikings. You could not have asked for a worse performance than this. Just to put it into perspective, 79 passing yards is all the Vikings had. Broncos had more than that in one play. That's how bad this Vikings offense looked. And we're going to take a look in the defense, but mostly the offensive side of the ball. Now, to be fair, though, this was just about all second and third stringers on the Vikings offense and Vikings defense against a lot of starters on the Broncos team. Now, what I really don't understand is why the Vikings decided to sit 30 players. That just didn't make sense to me because a lot of them, like, you didn't want to play Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison, Danielle Hunter, Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr. You didn't want to play any of those players, but I really don't understand why the Vikings decided to sit players like Oli Udoh, Ezra Cleveland, and Rashad Hill. Those are 3 players I didn't understand. Those are 3 players in the offensive line where you want to build chemistry that I don't really get why the Vikings decided to sit. Same goes for Tyler Conklin. Anyways, taking a look at the Vikings, though. Since this game, Riley Patterson, kicker, has been cut. Blake Prowell has also been cut. I'm pretty sad to see that, but it was expected. Turner Bernard has been cut, long snapper, and then Jordan Brailford. So the only one here that's actually surprising is Jordan Brailford because he was the top-ranked defensive end by PFF for the Minnesota Vikings last year, and I believe it was 92 out of 100, which is very good. But with that being said, though, Vikings did bring in a lot of new defensive ends. They brought back Stephen Weatherly. They drafted defensive ends in the 3rd and 4th round, and then we have the great Danielle Hunter coming back off of an injury. So there's really no room for Jordan Brailford on this roster, which is why they cut him now, and I would expect he would go play for another team, either in the practice squad or on their active roster, because he's a talented defensive end, and we just didn't have room for him. Okay, but there is some good to look at for this game against the Denver Broncos. Yes, the Vikings lost 33-6, but there's some positives that we saw. One of them being Kellen Mond. Now, Kellen Mond did not have a great performance, as I already went over. The quarterbacks did not have a good performance. But what I did like to see was him using his legs, because this is something we have not seen by any Minnesota Vikings quarterback since Dante Culpepper, I believe. No quarterback has been able to turn passing plays into running plays with their legs, which is exactly what you want to see. One thing about Kellen Mond, he is a passer first and a runner second. You can design plays for him to run, but he's no Lamar Jackson. He will most likely use his legs when there's no plays that he can make with his arm, is what I'm saying here. So just seeing him turning plays into running plays where I believe he ran for 2 first downs, you love to see that. Great. I would expect to see Kellen Mond play start next week, and hopefully we can see some better players on offense, because if his wide receivers he's working with is KJ Osborne and Amir Smith-Marset, and then the tight ends he's working with are Shane Zylstra, and Brandon Dillon. Not the best scenario for him to be in. I would expect to see it be a little bit better than it was this last week. Not to mention that offensive line where Dakota Dozier and Drew Samio was starting, and we're not going to get into that quite yet here. So on top of that, we did see Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd looks like an excellent corner. The only good piece on this Vikings secondary was Chris Boyd. The rest of them all looked horrible. That's including Cameron Dantzler, who gets a lot of hype, especially from Minnesota Vikings fans, which I really don't understand. I mean, I love Cameron Dantzler, but I don't understand why we have Vikings fans who are saying he's going to turn it to be a lockdown corner. I mean, look at the guy. He's undersized. He's not as fast. He's not going to be a lockdown corner. He's no Jalen Ramsey. He's no Xavier Howard. I mean, he's just a okay corner. And I expect to see him start this next week as well, and probably all preseason games on top of that. Jake Bargas at fullback did actually look very good. He was kind of that silent piece for the Vikings, but with that being said, CJ Ham's the best fullback in the league. We don't really need Jake Bargas, but just to have him on the practice squad would be good to see. And then last but certainly not least, AJ Rose Jr. After Kene Nwanu did suffer with an injury off of kickoff, we saw AJ Rose Jr. play a majority of the snaps on offense in the backfield for the rest of the game, and you love to see this. He ran 25 carries for 100 yards, totaling at exactly 4 yards per carry. So running backs, they make immediate impacts in the NFL. I mean, the rookie seasons are usually their best seasons. Second year is usually actually their best, and then they usually go down from there. So AJ Rose Jr., a highlight on this Vikings offense, and he's most certainly, after a performance like that, going to at least make the practice squad. There's a lot to unpack in the first quarter, as this was a very, very heavy first quarter for offense and defense, and we just saw the Vikings offense and defense completely fall apart. So Kene Nwanu was injured on the Vikings kickoff, the kickoff to the game, and this really just led to AJ Rose Jr. taking that role with Amir Abdullah, and then them basically splitting snaps from there. So this was disappointing to see, especially for me, because I've really backed Kene Nwanu. I said that he's going to be this breakout player for the preseason. While I still do back that statement, seeing the injury was rough because I really want him to prove himself, because he should be our running back 3 over Amir Abdullah. No question about it. So after the Vikings did suffer with the injury, Kene Nwanu, the Vikings had an instant 3-and-out on offense, and a majority of it is because you're starting Dakota Dozier and Drew Samia at guard. I don't understand the Vikings. I don't get it. You've seen Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer have seen how bad Dakota Dozier is. They've seen how bad Drew Samia is, and yet they continue to play them. Now, I get it. It's preseason, but don't you want to see what these other guys can do? Don't you want to see a player like Kyle Hinton prove himself? Wyatt Davis prove himself? Oli Uda at guard, who has never played a snap at guard, they decided to sit, prove himself. All 3 of those guys I just named are most likely better than Drew Samia and Dakota Dozier. There's no reason at this point why the Vikings should even have Dakota Dozier on this upcoming roster. Dakota Dozier, the first score of the game. Now, let's unpack this. So Vikings had an instant 3-and-out. They punted the ball. Drew Lock led his team to the 3rd and goal, and then 4th and goal it was, and targeted his wide receiver, Jerry Jeudy, where Chris Boyd patted down the completion. Forced the incomplete pass. Great. Like I said, Chris Boyd was the highlight. He was one of the players that looked very good on this Vikings defense. Now the ball turned over and the Vikings had the ball. What happened? Dakota Dozier had a holding foul in the end zone on Shamar Stephen. That Vikings were down 2-0 at that point. And they continued to play Dakota Dozier. I don't know what else there is to see. Why the Vikings do not just cut Dakota Dozier now. Dakota Dozier had both the holding penalty that led to a safety and a false start in the first quarter. And then they finally decided to sit him, and I expect to see nothing more of Dakota Dozier. Do not play any more Dakota Dozier. Cut him off of your roster. The other guards are better, and I haven't even seen very much of Wyatt Davis or Kyle Hinton, and I'm assuming that they're 100% better. Same goes for Oli Uda. Anyways, unpacking what happened there, KJ Hamler did burn Cameron Dantzler on an 80-yard touchdown, which that's your great Cameron Dantzler right there. That's your lockdown corner that a lot of Vikings have been backing up. I am very happy that the Vikings brought in all of these new corners on our team, because I wasn't very comfortable with just relying on Cameron Dantzler, who did have a very good rookie season, and I'll give him that, and I'm very excited to see what he can do year 2. But with that being said, you have to be safe. You have to take the safe route, and that is bringing in veteran corners like they did with Patrick Peterson, Mackenzie Alexander, and Brashad Breeland. So seeing that, Vikings, we also saw Zach Davidson drop a touchdown in the end zone, which was terrible. We saw Amir Smith-Marset 0-2 uncatchable catches. Chris Boyd did force another incompletion. So really the only good thing about the Minnesota Vikings in the first quarter was Chris Boyd forcing 2 incompletions against Jerry Jeudy. So excellent corner. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of Chris Boyd than Cameron Dantzler in 2021. Chris Boyd, 7th round draft pick in 2020 or 2019, has outperformed Cameron Dantzler in the first preseason game. And I would expect that those two would be our starting corners going into preseason week 2. And we also saw Stephen Weatherly have a false start in the on third down in the first quarter, which again, that's Stephen Weatherly. He should not be doing that. He's a veteran defensive end and is supposed to be our starter. At this point, I wouldn't even start Stephen Weatherly. I would expect that DJ Wanham would take that role, but we have 2 more preseason games to go to see who really can earn that role. Another thing, though, Janarius Robinson did look very good at defensive end. I know he almost did have that interception where he did break up a pass, so I wouldn't be surprised if 4th round draft pick Janarius Robinson takes that starting role. But then you also have Patrick Jones, you have DJ Wanham, you have Stephen Weatherly. So there's a lot of players, and it's going to be interesting to see which player will actually take that starting role to obviously be alongside Danielle Hunter at defensive end and hopefully can make some impacts. Second quarter wasn't much better than the first quarter. It started off with Jake Browning throwing a pick 6 to Patrick Surtain, and this is where the Vikings benched Jake Browning and brought in Kellen Mond, rookie out of Texas A&M, drafted in the 3rd round. And Kellen Mond was supposed to be this guy who was going to save us. Now, we didn't get to see enough of Kellen Mond. We did get to see him use his legs. We got to see him make some reads, but overall, you just see how Kellen Mond is that guy who maybe in a few years can be great. He has a huge upside, but as of right now, he's nowhere near starting role and is likely not going to be playing for Kirk's job anytime soon. But again, we have 2 more preseason games to go where I would expect to see a better Kellen Mond performance than he did on Saturday. So we did get to see Kellen Mond come out, and he did okay. I mean, I'm not going to give him any credit. The Vikings didn't have a very good offense as a whole, so he did hit some of his receivers where they dropped the pass. He did hit, I believe it was Watt Fillier in the end zone where Watt Fillier did drop the pass, and I can't believe he couldn't just hold on to that. But again, he's an undrafted player, so got to give him that. So anyways, Kellen Mond did not have a terrible performance, but with that being said, you also saw that he has a long way to go from being an NFL starter or even close to that. And then obviously cut Kellen Mond some slack. The wide receivers were not very good that he was working with, but also there's this saying that everyone says the best quarterbacks make the worst wide receivers look good. And he made nobody look good. He hit his receiver in the end zone, and that's about it. That's all we got to see from Kellen Mond, and then we also saw him use some legs. So anyways, Jalen Holmes also in the second quarter had 2 penalties. Another player who should have, there's no reason why the Vikings should still have Jalen Holmes on this roster. No reason at all. I mean, he has 1 more year left on his contract. Vikings brought in 2 defensive ends, and you cut Jordan Brailford before you cut Jalen Holmes. Jalen Holmes and Dakota Dozier, I've seen enough of these 2 guys, and they should be cut. Same would go for Drew Samia, but we're not going to cut Drew Samia because he's on his rookie contract, and he has a couple more years left to go. Not to mention, I believe he's 23 years old, so he has a long way to go. So, but with Dakota Dozier and Jalen Holmes, there's no reason why these 2 players should still be on the roster, and you should cut them both, especially after a game like we saw. And that's the first half of the game, and it basically covers the entire game because in the second half of the game, we saw just the same thing we saw in the first half. More penalties, more incompletions. We didn't get to see more turnovers. Kellen Mond didn't turn the ball over, which you have to give it to that. So anyways, Kellen Mond had a total of 53 passing yards, a 37.5 completion percentage, which is very poor, and a 47.1 passer rating, which is also really bad. So overall, though, Kellen Mond, I would expect to see a better performance going into week 2 and week 3 of the preseason. AJ Rose Jr., though, was the highlight on this Vikings offense and Vikings team as a whole with 100 rushing yards, 25 carries, averaging 4.5 yards 4 yards per carry, and we also got to see 2 field goals made. So a terrible performance by the Minnesota Vikings. And next week, Vikings play the Colts. They host the Colts at home on Saturday, 7 p.m. Central Time, ABC, CBS, and Fox. I would expect to see Kellen Mond play the entire game, unless if he plays bad. I would expect to see Kellen Mond start this game and the Vikings to expect to play Kellen Mond all 4 quarters, but if he does look bad, likely sit for Nate Stanley and Jake Browning, and I would like to see those 2 players play as well. I want to see Nate Stanley get a chance, at least a chance, because if he doesn't, he's going to get cut and likely not play with another team. So I want to see Nate Stanley get a chance, but if Kellen Mond looks great, just keep Kellen Mond in. I would expect to see AJ Rose and Kene Nwanu split snaps. AJ Rose had a great first week. Kene Nwanu, if he's back, I want to see what he can do as well. And I'm sure Rick Spielman and the Vikings would like to see that too. I would like to see our tight end start. I want to see Irv Smith Jr. and Tyler Conklin and Chad Beebe all start this next week. It would really help out Kellen Mond because Kellen Mond in college loved to use his tight ends and slot wide receivers. So I want to see more of these guys start instead of just throwing Kellen Mond out there and saying, work with Amir Smith-Marset, KJ Osborne, and Brandon Dillon and expect for him to have a great game. Not to mention the fact that the offensive line is garbage. On top of that, I would like to see a near starting offensive line. Now, you have to sit Brian O'Neill. Brian O'Neill is an excellent right tackle that you don't want to risk getting injured. You want to sit him. Outside of that, there was no reason why the Vikings should have sat Oli Uda, Ezra Cleveland, Garrett Bradbury, and Rashad Hill. I want to see all 4 of those players start on offensive line as it will build chemistry because that's expected to be our starting offensive line. Either Rashad Hill or Christian Darrisaw at left tackle or Oli Uda or Wyatt Davis at right guard. That's expected to be our offensive line right there, and they need to build up chemistry for the regular season. And there was no reason why the Vikings should have sat any of those players, especially Oli Uda. On top of that, I want to see Cameron Dantzler and Chris Boyd play at cornerback, as they are playing for that cornerback 4 role at this point. With Jeff Gladney being cut and Cameron Dantzler not looking good, it's possible Chris Boyd will be our cornerback number 4 going into this upcoming season. And then Bynum and Metellus at safety. I don't know where Josh Metellus was in week 1, but I want to see more of him as well, because he's expected to be on this active roster and he needs to earn his spot as well. So with all that being said, basically starting everybody week 2, except for the players who have really earned their spot being set. I don't understand this thing where Rick Spielman and Minnesota Vikings teams and teams around the NFL love to sit all of their starters. I just don't get it. I understand you want to see your backup players play, but you're really not giving your backup players a chance. Now, you don't play Danielle Hunter. You don't want to risk him getting injured. You don't play Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison. You don't play Justin Jefferson even, or Adam Thielen, or you can play a little bit of Kirk Cousins to get him warmed up. But outside of that, Harrison Smith, you don't play him. You don't play Patrick Peterson. Basically everybody else you do want to play, except for Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr. So most players you want to play, but a lot of the players did not earn their spot on being benched, because they really aren't that great. A lot of these starters that the Vikings benched. So with that being said, I would like to see these players all play week 2, preseason week 2, where we can have a better performance against the Denver Broncos, led by quarterback Kellen Mond, who we will be previewing all this episode on Thursday. So I hope you all do enjoy. Thank you.